To share with y'all an important subject today. What happens is oftentimes people will study like pagan gods, like little gods, right? Like so Pluto, Saturn, Mercury, Apollo, the sun, Aphrodite. And so it really becomes an innumerable amount of pagan gods, Zeus, Jupiter. And so the way that this applies is that the different people of these ancient groups, they would deify the stars, or they would deify the planets. So there's about a million different stars, and there's 7 or 8 different planets. And planeo even is the word in the scriptures for sin, or to means to go astray, and that's the word for Nod, which when it said Cain left, he left to the land of Nod, which means wandering. And we can see that in all of these ancient movies, or ancient stories, ancient tales. So like when the scriptures speak of or when you see in the movie The Clash of the Titans, it's the story that was written in the stars. Or you see the movie The Gods of Egypt, it's about the story that was written in the stars. Or if you see these different stories like Iliad or the Odyssey, it's the story that was in the stars. That's what that story is. It's the same thing every time. Someone goes down into hell. Sometimes it might be the man to rescue a woman, or the woman might go to rescue the man down in hell, like the little Disney movie Hercules. If you watch these movies, you'll see they're all talking about the same thing. Even Moana, that new Disney movie, is a picture of this same story, and it has to do with the stars. That is the most ancient story that there is, because in Psalm 19 it says, even the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth forth his handiwork. Well, the glory of God is Christ. So this ancient story is really a story about Christ and rescuing his bride, which is the ecclesia, the church. Or I don't like to use that word, as you know from my studies, the instrumentality that God uses upon the earth, his body. The head is in the heavens, the body is on the earth. Where the head is, there is the body. The head is in the heavens, the body's on the earth. The body can't be without the head can't be without the body. So that's a picture of Christ. Christ is the head. He's the head over all powers and principalities, and he subdued them, and he is our God. He is our ruler. So what this amounts to is understanding that men pervert the true gospel, the true story of God, the death and the resurrection. Isn't that what happens in all these stories? Clash of the Titans, the gods of Egypt. Someone dies and goes to hell, and then they go and they have to save them. Well, as we said, that's a corruption, because in the scriptures, Hades is from the word Iddo means the sea, and Eides, or Hades, has as a alpha on the beginning of the word, negates the word and gives it an opposite meaning. So it means the place of the unseen, like the crypt, the hidden. So that's why we call the grave the crypt. Or if you're dealing with like maybe cryptology, you're talking about things that are hidden. You have to decrypt the message. So what we find that, as in Bullfinch's mythology, which is a work on these different mythologies, that this story is written in the stars, as with Orion, the Pleiades. Well, those are all just corruptions of the true story. And that's why the 7 gatherings, the instrumentality of Christ upon the earth, it's the 7. Well, the 7 star system is the Pleiades, and what the shape of those different gatherings on earth there in, I believe, modern day Turkey, Asia Minor, was in the shape of the Pleiades. So Orion was said to be a picture of the hunter who was chasing these 7 women. And there's different interpretations of the story, but the thing is that it's not Orion. The picture in the stars is of Christ. Men corrupted it, as they corrupt the Bible, and they make their own God, They make their own version of Jesus Christ. Well, the truth is the things that are true, not what men make up about them and these traditions. And stultification has to do with making these different traditions, and then people begin to follow these traditions that are man-made. That's what it talks about in Mark chapter 7, I believe it is, and then the different gospels repeat the same thing, that people will do all these ritual washings, they'll do all of these different rituals with this thing that the world calls church, which has nothing to do with what the Bible speaks of when it speaks of the instrumentality of God upon the earth and the assembling of ourselves together. Jesus said, where two or three gather in my name, there I'm in the midst of them. So that's the assembling of ourselves together. And no one has any rule outside of Christ. So people will talk about rulers, and they'll talk about elders, and they'll talk about bishops, and they'll talk about deacons, and then they're not doing anything that resembles what the scriptures talk about. So the only rule anybody has to exercise is within the guidelines of the truth, which is the exposure of the wickedness upon the earth. Aletheia, the word for truth, a, again, as the negative particle, negates the word, and lanthano means to lie hid or concealed. So alanthano means to take the cover off. So lanthano, put an A on the front of it, it gives it the opposite meaning. So rather than being covered, you uncover it. That's what truth is. So truth is uncovering. So I wanted to uncover a little bit with y'all about how the story got twisted and where it comes from. Well, the original title for the word son was Shemesh, which means servant. But what people turned it into was Baal, and Baal means Lord. And then Baal means confounder, and Merodach means the rebel. And if you read Jeremiah 51, you'll see Merodach, Merodach, I believe. But so Merodach or Merodach, I can't remember how you say it exactly. But the image was broken down, and so Baal means confounder, and it says, so it means the confounder is confounded there, actually. So Baal is the place where men would confound you because it was private interest groups. There's no such thing as these false gods. So anywhere where you find these images or these false gods, it's because people are actually making up different ways to make profits, right? Not only profits, but prophets, the prophets of Baal, right? Are the prophets of Baal, where they're making money, right? They like we said before, they worship the profit margin. So what all of this translates into is that these wicked men are making up their own gods and their own words for the gods, and usually the words have meaning. So if you look up Mercury, it has a meaning. If you look up Jupiter, it has a meaning. Zeus. All of these old words have meaning, so they would choose these words for their gods, which would be some kind of description of them. And then they would rally around, and it would be a special interest group. They would be learned, or they would be the counselors for the king, like the Chaldeans. They were the counselors for the Nebuchadnezzar, for example. And then the serpent was the counselor for Eve, right? And Eve, as a picture of Sophia. Well, Sophia, or sophistry, means to be wise, or wise at working with your hands. And philosophia means to be fond of Sophia, the goddess of wisdom. And that's always personified in the alma mater, the instruction of whatever school it would be. So the school of Zeus, or the school of Mercury, or the school of these false gods. As opposed to Jesus Christ, who is Yahweh incarnate, and he incarnates in the ecclesia, his instrumentality. And he says, I'll teach you directly, as it says in 1 John chapter 2, I believe it is, where it says, you have no need that any man teach you, but he'll teach us, right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, it says, come out from among them and be ye separate, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you, and I will walk in the midst of you, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. And then again in Jeremiah, where that's quoted from, it says, "You'll have no need that no man shall teach his neighbor. I'll teach you," he says. They won't say everybody know the Lord, for everybody shall know me, from the least to the greatest. So we just find all of these different confusions to the point to where men try to chase down these traditions. Though, like, so what I found in my studies is a lot of times someone might study the Halakha or the Haggadah, which went into the Talmud, which is the Midrash, which is the Jewish writings, and you have the Targum and all of these different things, which are just man-made traditions. It's the same way that people might follow Chuck Smith or Chuck Swindoll or John MacArthur or R.C. Sproul or these other big-time religious leaders like what was that? There's another guy I wanted to name here. There's so many of them. I mean, it goes on and on. James Vernon McGee, there you go. So people will read all of these guys' writings. They'll take the time to study what they have written. They'll buy their commentaries and read their comments. And then they never even know what the scriptures mean because these guys are trying to make money. There's no money tied into letting you understand that God is working through you, or understanding that Christ is in charge of you. Jesus Christ himself will teach you, he says, through his Spirit, the Spirit of Christ. The Spirit of Christ is the Holy Spirit, and that is God. And so there's been a big perversion throughout the history of the church, which stems from Babylon, which had a trinity of Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz, and that's the son that they were weeping for in Ezekiel chapter 8. And they were worshiping his image, just in the same way that they would burn their children in the fires of Tophet and in Malcolm, and offer up their children in the fires of Molech. So what that actually, the way that this has happened is that whole system has still been carried around from Eve. The original Trinity, right? Satan, Eve, and Adam. They are the Trinity, and they've taken on these different forms like Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. And then that spread once the table of nations were spread under Ham, Japheth, and Shem, and that spread to like Egypt and in the Horn of, or in the North Africa there in Egypt, they worshipped Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And so that's called henotheism, because those were just chief deities from a large array of deities there. But they would pick out three, which were their main chief deities. And so much the same way in this system of the world that they call church, they let them keep the gods of alcohol, Bacchus, right? They let them keep the gods of their marijuana. They let them keep the gods of money, or God, G-A-W-D, right? Gad, which is the distribution of fortunes. So this all just relates to special interest groups who make their own gods, like these different denominations, whether it be Baptist, Pentecostal, Church of Christ, Roman Catholicism. And all of these places are just Roman Catholicism, because they're just taking the Christian names and placing them upon the ancient gods of Mercury, Saturn, Venus, Aphrodite, Jupiter, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. Gaia was the earth god, right? And then you have Uranus, Saturn, so Mars, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, so just all these different gods that they worshipped, and Pluto, right? But they're not always tied to the planets. Some of those planets were just given these names, but originally they were just different gods that they worshipped, and they gave the different planets these names. But you don't always have to, you shouldn't think of it like that all the time, that they're necessarily associated to the planets, but a story in the stars. So, but even if you do think of it as the association with the planets, that's the Grecian knowledge. The Grecians were one of the biggest problems that took over the church because the Grecians thought the Christian message was stupid. Paul said. He said it was foolishness to the Greeks. They wanted wisdom, and that's why Tertullian, when he was trying to spread the word, came up with his development of the doctrine of the Trinity, and St. Augustine was the one who helped develop it as well, which is Roman Catholicism. And then it survived in Protestantism because the Reformation was to reform the Roman Catholic Church, not to do away with it. And so that survived in like the Baptist, the Methodist, the Church of Christ, and then Frontier Revivalism, because they all just do the same things. They just gave it different names. The priest, they changed to preacher. Instead of saying transubstantiation and eating the crackers and grape juice became the literal body and blood of Christ, they say, hey, well, we don't believe it becomes the literal body and blood of Christ, but you got to do it. And the water rituals, when the fire ritual of Rome was outlawed, and that's the head receiving the deadly wound in Revelation, it resurrected in the form of Roman Catholicism. So they just changed their god's Aphrodite to Mary. They changed their god Jupiter to Peter. They changed their god Apollo to Jesus Christ. They changed their god Hermes to Paul. And so they call it Mercury. But so the Grecian names and the Roman names and the Egyptian names and the Babylonian names for all these different gods, they just gave them Christian names. That's why when we're exposed to this thing they call the church in this world, it's Circe. She caused the whole nations to drink of the abominations of her cup. People don't drink the cup anymore and teach the truth of the cross, which is to be hated, persecuted, suffer, tribulation, go into the way of crowding, the straight gate, the gate of groaning. Like in Romans, that word stenazo is the same as stenos for straight. So, and narrow is the same word that's for tribulation. And so, yeah, you have to tribute. You have to go through pain to enter into the kingdom. You have to go through trials. You know, Paul said 5 times I was beaten with 39 stripes, save one. Because they had to take away one, because if they hit them 41 times on accident, they would have to be beaten themselves. So they would only hit him 39 times. And that happened 5 times to Paul. And then James was killed, Stephen was killed. All these apostles were killed for the most part. And at least tortured and put into prison. So that's a picture of killing. Everyone thinks it's got to be a literal death, but the scriptures say just separating from your brother without a cause is murder. And that's why Cain killed his brother, because he hated his brother. If you hate your brother, you're a murderer, the scripture says. So you hate them. In the synagogues, they hate us, which is the system of the church. The system of the church is just is syncretism and an amalgamation and a conglomerate and just this big mixture. The whore of Circe, or the woman who sat on the beast arrayed in scarlet, she gave the nations a drink of her filth. And that is the system that goes to Babylon. Babylon, mother of harlots. And Eve mothered the serpent doctrine and taught it to Adam, and then it got carried on. And it just happens over and over in the form of these institutions, these incorporations, these so institutions and corporations and establishments, if you define those words, you'll find that it goes to the idea of these aristocrats and monarchies. And the aristocrats are the learned men, and they're the Chaldeans, right? And every nation has them. The Chaldeans, the think tanks, they call it. The illumined ones, right? The Illuminati. They're not really illumined. They're just a bunch of selfish pricks, right? Who are just trying to make money off of the poor. And that's what happened. That's why the system is brought down, and one stone won't be left upon another, because they're taking the last 2 mites of the widows. God made it plain that you're supposed to do good to the widow, the fatherless, the orphan, the poor. But they take the money and they just rip everybody off. It's sad. So what I want you to take from this is that this is the story that was written in the stars that was twisted in all of these different stories, again, like Clash of the Titans, the Odyssey, the gods of Egypt, Iliad. And so all of these different stories are just the same amalgamated mixture. They took the story from the stars, they made up their own gods, and the scriptures say that the stars preach Christ. You know, it says that the heavens declare the glory of God. They gush out the story of the sky, of the stars, and that's what it says that. God says to Abraham, Yahweh says to Abraham that so shall thy seed be, there in Genesis 15, when he tells him to go and number the stars. Safar, to go and give an account for them. And that's a cipher. You don't know the names of all the stars and everything. And that's why some good books like Witness in the Stars by E.W. Bullinger or The Gospel in the Stars, I can't remember that guy's name, but the book's called The Gospel in the Stars. They give you a bunch of the Arabic knowledge that has preserved the true names of the stars, like the foot that crushes is the name of one of the stars in Orion. And that means that has to do with the prophecy that's written in the stars of the person who crushes the serpent. Christ bruises the serpent, right? Well, the serpent, and they gave it the false name of Orion, but that's Christ. So Orion's always depicted as battling the serpent or the great hunter in the sky. So, and sometimes it's depicted as a scorpion, and scorpion's the word scatter, and that's what Baal does with these private interest groups. They have these clubs, and Baal was a club. Like all of these different false gods was just a club everybody joined. And then they draw men to them with their regalia and their big temples, and men come there and they cast their money in there, and maybe they get some temple prostitutes. So they're there to chase women, but they have lights and all these deceiving wonders in their initiatory rites. Like maybe they run the light through the whiskey bottle and they make it look like stars, and they give you some hallucinogens. So by the time you leave there, you think that you went on a journey through space. That's what it will say if you do the study into the researches of ISIS and some of the rites that went on in those temples, is that they would drug people, and then they would have all these lights, and people would come out of there and they would think that they had done something spectacular because the lying, deceivable wonders of the mysteries. Mystery, Babylon, the great mother of harlots. She started all idolatry. So all idolatry in the world is from her. The governments, the businesses, the schools, the churches, it's all from her. She mothered it. And to mother something is to nurture it, right? When you nurture a child, you nurse it. They call it nursing, right? When a mother feeds her child. Sorry, there's a plane passing by right overhead. Maybe I can get it in. Yep. So they worship the system of Babylon, and they mother this false system. And it's all of these different names, whether Ishtar, Isis, Easter, Ostara. That goes back to the grove, which is Astaroth, which is the tree poles. The maypole is the picture of that. They called it grove, but it doesn't actually make sense in a lot of the contexts, but a pole of wood. And then they would worship the serpent god there, right? Whether it's Aesculapius or Apollo or Serapis or the seraphim. Baal and Grove was just a generic title for all of these false gods that originated in Babylon. So people are helping contribute to the system when they don't go and preach. They don't confess Christ, which means to speak the same words as him, and they don't speak it together. So everyone's divided, and the opposite of confess is to deny. They deny Christ. They don't speak the same words as him. They go and follow these man-made systems with these serpent kings, the heirs to money, because the baby in the womb was likened to a fish or sometimes a serpent, and it's called the heir. So because it was in the lake of the womb, and the water serpent or Leviathan, the father of pride. So they raise up these children to rule your children, and then we end up having to worship this guy, because if you don't, you can't buy or sell. And that's why it says in Deuteronomy chapter 6, Yahweh and his law will be a sign on your forehead and a mark on your hand. But they change money into the mark on your hand and the mark on your forehead, and the only way you can get it is to accept the system of the world, which is the decrees of the king, the 501(c) tax write-off, and just accepting whatever this man says and whatever patent he puts on decrees, rather than doing what is right and denying those things and confessing Christ and loving your brothers. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and treat your brother as yourself, right? All right, well, I hope that this helps, and I hope y'all found this informative. So remember, special interest groups is the reason why no one will hear our voice. If you don't be a part of that group, you won't be heard, right? All right, well, y'all take it easy. Bye.